The Chicago Civil Rights Movement by Andrea, Joel, and Devell. The Civil Rights Movement in Chicago affected the lives of many Chicagoans by changing and fighting the systematic oppression of colored people. This also helped to combat racism and pave the way towards racial equality. In Chicago, African Americans faced racial inequality through racism. They were also segregated and had many social issues. Some examples were restaurants declined African Americans, theaters forced them to sit in the top balcony. City schools and places of public accommodation were also segregated. They also faced inadequate schooling, substandard and overcrowded housing, and the lack of access to jobs. The Civil Rights Movement was a struggle by African Americans in the mid-1950s to late 1960s to achieve civil rights equal to those of whites, including equal opportunity to employment, housing, and education, as well as the right to vote, the right of equal access to public facilities, and the right to be free of racial discrimination. Public figures such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and James Farmer tried to address these issues. Organizations began to form to also help bring reform. Examples are the Coordinating Council of Community Organizations, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the National Association for the Colored People. The Civil Rights Movement helped to create organizations to take a stand for their rights. Specifically, the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, formed to give more of a voice in the Civil Rights Movement. Created by Ella Baker, then the director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, she was concerned that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was out of touch with younger blacks who wanted the movement to progress faster. They became the more radical group of the time and resorted to violence if they needed to. Another organization that helped the civil rights movement was the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP was founded in 1909 in New York City by a group of biracial activists. Originally called the National Negro Committee, it is the nation's oldest civil rights organization. They use legal strategies rather than actions to overcome and try to address this issue. First sought to make whites aware of the need for racial equality. To do this, the organization launched a program of speech making, lobbying, and publicizing the issue. At the same time, the NAACP attacked segregation and racial inequality through the courts. They won many Supreme Court decisions, for example, in 1915 against the Grandfather Clause, used by many southern states to prevent blacks from voting, and another in 1927 against an all-white primary. The NAACP became the dominant civil rights organization of 1950 and focused on segregation throughout public places to prove they were equal. Similar to the NAACP and intended goals was the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was established in 1957 to coordinate the action of local protest groups throughout the South. It was led by Martin Luther King Jr. with the goal of redeeming the soul of America through nonviolent resistance. The SCLC differed from organizations such as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the National Association for an Advancement of Colored People in that it operated as an umbrella organization of affiliates, trained local communities in the philosophy of Christian nonviolence by conducting leadership training programs and opening citizenship schools. Through its affiliation with churches and its advocacy of nonviolence, SCLC sought to frame the struggle for civil rights in moral terms. As early as 1962, SCLC began to broaden to include issues of economic inequality. Seeing poverty as the root for social inequality, Southern Christian Leadership Conference launched Operation Breadbasket. Operation Breadbasket was modeled after a selective patronage program. Breadbasket used the persuasive power of black ministers and organizations, its strength in the churches to create economic opportunities. It helped to create new jobs in the black community. Thanks to these organizations, the civil rights movement was able to gain many supporters and allow for the issue to be addressed. Without the organizations, there wouldn't be such a drastic change in history. Besides big organizations and committees joining together, many public figures formed and spoke and stood up against the issue. A well-known example is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister and social activist who played a key role in the American civil rights movement from the mid-1950s until his assassination in 1968. Inspired by advocates of nonviolence such as Mahatma Gandhi, King saw equality for African Americans, the economically disadvantaged, and victims of injustice through peaceful protest. He was put in charge of the bus boycott, which started when Rosa Parks, another important public figure at the time, refused to give up her seat on the bus. Activists coordinated a bus boycott that would continue for 381 days, placing a severe economic strain on the public transit system and the downtown business owners.
I was tired, but that isn't true. I wasn't any more tired than I usually was at the end of a workday. No, I wasn't tired physically. The only tired I was tired of giving in.
Are you going to move?
No.
Then I'll have to have you arrested.
You may do that.
Why don't you do as you're told and get up?
Why you all push us around?
I don't know. But the law is the law, and you're under arrest.
Rosa was arrested and taken to jail.
They choose Martin Luther King Jr. as the protest leader and official spokesman. MLK entered the national spotlight as an inspirational proponent of organized nonviolent resistance. He continued to form the SCLC with other civil rights activists, a group committed to achieving full equality for African Americans through nonviolence. In his role as SCLC president, MLK traveled across the country and around the world, giving lectures on nonviolent protests and civil rights, as well as meeting with religious figures, activists, and political leaders. He worked with a number of civil rights and religious groups to organize a march on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a peaceful political rally designed to shed light on the injustice of African Americans and continues to face across the country.
Be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And
held on August 28th and attended by some 200,000 to 300,000 participants. The event is widely regarded as a watershed moment in the history of American civil rights and a factor in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is where King gave his I Have a Dream speech, a spirited call for peace and equality. Following this, later that year, Congress passed the Voting Acts Right, which granted the right to vote first awarded by the 15th Amendment to all African Americans. King continued to advocate for this until he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. In memory, they made a national holiday after him. Another public figure in 1960 was James Farmer. He worked alongside Martin Luther King Jr. to resist against inequality through nonviolence. He helped to form CORE, the Committee of Racial Equality, and later changed to Congress of Racial Equality. It was formed to serve activists in Chicago to achieve their goals through nonviolence. James Farmer participated in many activist groups, so he's well known throughout the base on the topic. Due to these highly important people in history, African American lives in Chicago were changed in a positive way. Without these people standing up against the issue, there wouldn't be a change, or at least not as early as it was. With combination of the vast organizations formed and the public figures who stood up for the civil rights movement, they both allowed for change to happen. Due to their efforts, the Civil Rights Act was formed and outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This is a huge change for Chicago history and also for American history. It changed the life of many African Americans and allowed them to be equal with everybody due to them taking a stand for themselves.